I'm Kenneth Danford. I'm with Pat Farenga. We're presenting a workshop here for the Learning Planet Festival about self-directed learning and unschooling, which we use more or less synonymously, I think. And Pat is with Growing Without Schooling Holt Associates, and is going to give us some background and this whole life commitment to this whole approach. And then I'm going to tell you about my program in-person learning center called North Star Self-Directed Learning for Teens in Western Massachusetts, and then tell you about our Liberated Learners Network, which consults and helps people start centers using our approach all over the world. Right? And we'll each talk for a half hour max, and then we'll have a half hour for Q&A at the end there.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So Pat, tell them the life story.
All right. Well, let's see. Can you see the screen yet?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. All right. Well, all right. So John Holt, I started work with him in 1981, but he founded Grown Without Schooling magazine in 1977. And it turns out John was a political activist. Then he became a fifth grade teacher who was a lifelong observer of children. And as an author, he not only wrote about education, but society at large. He was more of a philosopher than a researcher in that sense. And after World War II, John fought in the Pacific in a submarine, saw a battle. And when the nuclear bomb was dropped on Japan, he and his shipmates were pretty appalled that one bomb would do that. And so John decided to make his life work at that point to stop nuclear war. And so he worked for a group called the World Federalists, which wanted to bring all nuclear weapons under one worldwide government arm for 6 years. And he became disillusioned with that because while he was recruiting people and adding people to this cause, and he believed deeply in the cause, nothing was changing except the Federalists were gaining more members. But there was no action in any way to stop the powers from using nuclear bombs or developing them further. And John became very disillusioned. And I think with this effort, and I think it also became the template for his disillusionment with so many institutions of modern society, and that which many of us, I think, share now. But what's interesting is John didn't just give up on that. He decided to work in his own ways towards stopping nuclear power, supporting various causes, but most importantly, by taking direct action to help to do those things that he could do to change things, no matter how small, but just so that he could feel that. And so after trying to figure out what to do after that period of his life, his sister, who was living with at the time in Colorado, said, why don't you become a teacher? Because she had 3 kids and he got along very well with them. So John became a 5th grade teacher at the Colorado Rocky Mountain School. And by his own words, he was a very tough teacher, very conventional, but he refused to make excuses for why his students didn't learn, calling them lazy or bad parents, blah, blah, blah. Because he felt that as a teacher, if he couldn't figure out how to do it, his job was to continue to figure out how to do it, not just give up and say, okay, you failed, and move on to the next class. So he was always trying to figure this out. And he became a very popular teacher, and he wound up working in exclusive elite private schools all around Colorado and then Massachusetts. And it was in Massachusetts that he was co-teaching with his friend Bill Hull at I think it was a Commonwealth school, still here, still one of the top schools in Boston. But they wanted to find out, they had this question, I teach, but they don't learn. Why? So John would sit in the back of the classroom and take notes when Bill taught and vice versa. And then they would compare their notes. And those notes eventually became this book by John Holt called How Children Fail. And one of the main points that John makes in this book, and remember, he was teaching in the late 50s and the book came out in 1964, was he noted that how pressure and stress was interfering, the pressure to succeed and the stress to do so many tasks that they didn't understand was confusing to the students. And he noted how scared his fifth graders were of math tests, for instance. So being a teacher in control of his own classroom, or so he thought, he decided not to give math tests for 2 weeks and instead help them with other stuff and talk about math in other ways. And he wound up getting fired from that private school just for doing that. And so John, learned firsthand, what this is like. But he understood very deeply, that fear impedes learning. And not understanding something is dangerous to your self-esteem. To admit that in front of a classroom of your classmates. And so most children retreat into quiet compliance in the classroom, pretending that they understand it or not. Basically, John, not a large part, but there are several really famous parts of this book where he describes the strategies that children learn to fake learning. But let me let you hear John in his own words describe this. Oh, hang on.
We need to make that point a little bit more clearly. The schools I was describing in How Children Fail were not public schools, but two elite private schools. One of them would be ranked by almost anybody as one of the top 2 or 3 elementary schools in the greater Boston area. There was an admissions policy in that school. You couldn't get in if you didn't have an IQ of 120. And it was of that school that I wrote when I said, about 1959, school is a place where children learn to be stupid. Meantime, I was seeing a lot of very young children, my sister's children, other children that I knew, and I realized that young infants were, this is commonplace today, believe me, this was a radical thought in 1960, that babies are scientists. They're enormously dedicated, energetic, resourceful, skillful learners, much better. Little teeny kids are much better at learning than almost any adult. So I said, why not let them do what they're already good at doing? Let the school be a place where they can continue their exploration of the world, only using perhaps more resources than they might find at home. It seemed an easy to do. It cost money. It seemed perfectly obvious. Well, they didn't do it. I spent quite a lot of time talking about it. I had no idea what an unpopular. I didn't think of this, that this would be a radical idea. Still, basically.
So you could see, John was very focused on these ideas, and it arises from his use of inductive reasoning. So much of schooling and education theory is based on deductive thinking, how we can take this huge mass, this huge category, and do a couple of things to make it all work the way we want it to work. Whereas John was like, how do I help this individual do what they want to do? And it's a completely different way of looking at things. So John, went from the specific to the general in his critiques of society and education. And in his next book, How Children Learn, came out 3 years later, he describes, this process of how children learn by experience and how adults could help them. And then in 1983, after John had been working with homeschoolers for almost 10 years at that point, he decided he had to revise both How Children Fail and How Children Learn, because they're his most popular books. I mean, both books have been in print consistently since they came, they came out. They've never been out of print. And he revised them in 1983 because of what he learned through homeschoolers and how important it was and how it really works so well to let children work through their strengths and their interests to learn, rather than to go through a list of things we adults think they need to learn at a certain age and a certain time. One of the things that John really nailed before people even had a word for it is that we all learn in different ways. And by the way, I got to point out, John Holt isn't the only one that had these ideas. Paul Goodman, there are other people. I mean, even Bronson Alcott, if you want to go all the way back into the 19th century, Louisa May Alcott's dad, he homeschooled his little woman daughters. And he had very, fairly similar ideas about, how children learn and giving them freedom and autonomy and working with them and not on them to help them learn. But multiple intelligences was a theory that came out in the 80s, and it's still talked about. This idea that there are 8 or 9 ways, different intelligences that people have. I won't get into all that. I do that in a workshop sort of situation. But the point is, in school, there's only one way to learn, and that is through instruction. If you're not a good auditory learner, if you don't follow the orders properly, you're pretty much lost in a classroom. And even if you are, sometimes the explanations are unclear, or the teacher only has a half-baked idea of what they're talking about. And so it's kind of confusing to the kids, but nonetheless, we don't have these other opportunities. And to illustrate this, there's another author who works with neurodivergent children a lot. His name is Dr. Thomas Armstrong. And he wrote this fictional account, but it's based on today's schooling, to illustrate how individualized learning is ignored in favor of keeping the machinery of education humming along. Let's not forget that schools evolved out of the industrial age. They were not part of society since the beginning of societies. There's always been places where we gathered and stuff, but there's never been compulsory schooling, 5 days a week, the factory of school, until the industrial age. So anyway, the story that Tom wrote is this: if Leonardo da Vinci were in grade school today, and he's like observing a meeting about the teachers talking about da Vinci. So the school psychologist says, well, I ran da Vinci through some tests, but his attention was all over the place. He kept looking at a part of the wall in my office where the plaster had fallen off and said he saw a battleship fighting a dragon. I'm wondering whether he needs a workup by a psychiatrist to rule out possible psychotic features. Then the learning disability specialist says, I'm concerned that he occasionally writes backwards. As you probably know, this is a soft sign for neurological dysfunction. And then the classroom teacher says, yes, I've seen those reversals in my classroom. He never seems to get any work done. He'll start one thing and then lose interest. He's always doodling in the margins of the worksheets I give him. And when he's not doing that, he's looking out the window daydreaming. The learning disability specialist then says, I've also noticed that in my remediation sessions with him. He appears to be a good candidate for psychostimulant medication. The idea that, we only learn when someone is instructing us, and that if we're not paying attention, we're bad students, haunts us to this day. It's a hangover that we all suffer from our schooling. And we have to try to figure out how not to do that to the next generation. I mean, anyone who's a parent knows that children learn without us knowing a lot of that they learn stuff. One of the great insights John had from working with homeschoolers, and that he added to this book, How Children Learn, he added a whole chapter about fantasy play, about how children don't use play, and fantasy play in particular, to escape from the world, but to understand it, to get into it. They're not, they want to, what's a cop and a robber like? What's a teacher like? What's a big, when my children were being unschooled, it was not uncommon for them and their friends to play school, right? In our living room, in our bedroom. They would set the dolls up and they would pretend to be the teachers and the students. So they're using play, but we don't let that. In fact, we have cut play out of education in so many ways. I won't get into that, but Dr. Peter Gray, in his book, Free to Learn, has a lot of great ideas about that. So real briefly now, I'm going to skip over. I mean, John wrote a lot of books. He wrote 10 books. I hope to be revising How Children Fail in the coming year. New edition of What Do I Do Monday is coming out in March. And, I mean, as an educator, he really thought past, like, how do I make all my students A students, and started questioning the whole system. And this led him into this whole crowd of other people. you know, I'm going to talk about Illich in a second, but one of them is this guy, George Dennison. And I put this in a recent blog post of mine because I thought it was such a great little quote. George wrote a book that John adored called The Lives of Children, about his work as an alternative educator in the First Street School, I think it was called, in Greenwich Village in Manhattan. And so George is giving a speech to alternative educators of the time, late 60s, and he says this: once you start looking for freedom, you're lost. Can you imagine finding it? Hey, here's freedom over here, look. But all you can see, is people doing things. What we mean is we're not going to coerce anybody, either by force or cunning. Force is cops and corporal punishment. Cunning is what's taught in the colleges of education, how to increase their attention span up to a maximum, of 60 minutes, and then you destroy it by ringing a bell. How to motivate them, and so on. But the absence of coercion isn't visible either. What's visible when things are going really well is simply activities. Activities of all kinds, especially, we hope, the kinds that harmonize energy, innate powers, and sweet reason. The real touchstone of freedom, is not joyous people romping in the grass, but quality, first-rate work. It may be slow to emerge, especially in the sense that I mean here, but still it is the touchstone. Verve, style, grace, lots of content, lots of meaning. You don't reach this by regimenting people or by having a lifestyle of freedom, which tends to be all style and no life, but by doing things, especially the things you can do with a whole heart. You don't discover who you are. I don't know where this vocabulary came from. You see it all the time in proposals for free schools, creating a climate of freedom so you can discover who you are. When someone says, I want to know who I am, what he really means is that he hasn't found the activities, the friends, and the loyalties that he can give himself to. These are not inside the self. They're all outside. And you discover them by looking outside. And when you find them, you don't feel that you've discovered yourself. You feel that you've discovered friends, activities, and loyalties. John sought many different solutions besides letting children socialize in compulsory schools. But it was the work of others, Ivan Illich in particular, that helped John understand how schooling had become such a big part of our lives in the last 150 years. Illich is a polymath. I mean, education is not his only topic. I mean, he wrote about health, and I won't even get into all of it. But and at a super high level, he was a polymath. He spoke 11 languages fluently. He was a Catholic priest. He spoke and dreamt in Latin. He was a very unusual man, and he had a really good idea of history. He studied not only he was an expert in the history of the Catholic Church, but he also studied all sorts of cultures in different types of philosophies. And one of the things that he noted about, when he was doing his study of schooling, his book was called Deschooling Society, is that schools, regardless of whether they're in a communist or a poor country or a wealthy country or a capitalist country, a democratic country, they all pretty much look the same. The structure, the curriculum design, the buildings and the rules, they're all pretty much the same in all the cultures around the world. It's this is a very strong technology. A gentleman named Jacques Ellul wrote The Technological Society in the late 50s, and he cites schools as a technology. And we know that it can be used nefariously, as Russia and China and other places have used re-education camps and so on, not to mention the book 1984. So education has a dark side for sure, and Illich saw that. But what he also saw was that school is a modern ritual. And here's how he describes it, his work here in this place.
Hiding from those who participate in it, the contradiction between what we celebrate in the ritual and what in fact through the celebration is produced in society. To give a very simple example, in school, we all are concerned about improving equality through schooling, and there has never been a better classifying institution, which creates a world of 12 and by now hundreds of different classes, than the ritual of schooling, or stream of education. I began to study the place which a secular liturgy holds in the social construction of modern social reality, and the traces which the ritual leaves on the mindset of the participants.
Yeah, Illich packs a lot of meaning into every word and sentence. But I want to be clear on one point here. In describing how families can live and learn without education, without schooling, I'm not trying to demonstrate that schools should be eradicated, and neither was Illich when he wrote Deschooling Society. So many people get turned off by the title and don't read the book. You know, homeschoolers, unschoolers, we use classes. We even use traditional teaching methods, even textbooks and canned curricula. And we can even take public school classes in some states. And we do so on our terms. We decide we'll do it. And so we play that game. Yeah, I know the rules of school. I will participate in that. The unschoolers have determined what, when, why, how, and from whom they want to learn, and are therefore in an entirely different relationship with their schooling than students who are simply in class because of their age and going through the ritual. Let's see. So that's a brief overview of Illich's connection here. And there's a whole deschooling movement back in the late 60s and 70s. You know, Illich kind of crystallized it with that book. But you'll see later when I show some other books, other people in other countries are also thinking along these lines. This is research that came out about 15, 20 years ago about homeschooling, and I still find it fascinating. What this researcher found was that the lower the level of direct instruction, the shorter the teaching year, and the less frequently rewards and grades were used, resulted in higher levels of achievement for homeschoolers. But ironically, the parents expressed higher levels of satisfaction with their homeschooling experience when their programs were more intensive. So whose need is it to teach? The parents, so that they feel good about doing this, or the teachers? We really have to wonder. I mean, we're all about research and data, but we don't like research and data like this that kind of goes against the grain. Here's another one. Sugata Mitra. I mean, he was a real big deal about a decade ago, and people aren't paying attention to this stuff anymore. But he did these hole-in-the-wall experiments in India. Basically, he put a computer in a wall that faced out to a common area on the street, and kids roaming the streets could use the computer, but it was only in English, and the mouse was connected to it, and everything was kind of hardwired into this wall. And he videotaped what happened. He's an engineer. He's not an educator, by the way. This is something that I just had this idea. What would happen? Well, as these he has these TED Talks that I've listed here. You can watch them about how these children, street children, taught themselves and each other, and purely motivated by curiosity and peer interest. And he won $1 million from the TED company, and he's now he's trying to implement these ideas in a conventional school. I don't know if it's a conventional school, but in some sort of school in Britain. And I have not seen much about his work since then, but I think it's very important that we realize that even computers, and we know this from our own, I mean, I'm 67. I wasn't taught how to use computers. I taught, most of us had to teach ourselves. We learned that way. But now we have this terrible idea that kids won't learn computers unless they're taught them in school. Moving on, Ken is going to talk about this, and this is my segue into Ken. So there's been a lot of studies about, well, what if we let high school kids choose what they want to learn? Well, this was back in the 1930s, and this was a real solid study. It was, before I get to Jefferson's children, the story of the 8-year study, real quick. It was funded by the American Congress, 4 years of high school. And they chose, I think, 20 or 23 high schools. All were alternative in some other ways, or what they used to call in the 30s laboratory schools. And then the next 4 years were all these kids who graduated from those experimental schools were automatically granted admission to the college of their choice. And then it was to see how they did. That's the 8 years. How did they do? 4 years of high school, alternatively, 4 years of conventional college. And what the 8-year study showed was that the moral alternative of the schools, the better the students seem to do in college. And in fact, many of the college professors were trying to figure out who were the alternatively educated students in their classes, and they were almost always wrong. So it's really interesting. So that was in the 30s. They were trying to change the education system, and they didn't. And then in the 80s or 90s, Leon Botstein, I think he was at Bard College, a chancellor there. He wrote a book called Jefferson's Children about how we need to change high school. And then Horace's school, we're designing American high school from the Sizers, Ted and Ed. These are all respectable people with lots of money behind them and stuff. None of this has changed. If anything, school has become more rigid and more stuck in its ways, you know. And that's because, and this came up, you know, when I was talking to Irish homeschoolers about, I don't know, 6 or 8 weeks ago. We had a small informal session, and there a lot of unschoolers were there, and they were talking about, you know, the evaluators were coming into their homeschools and saying, you know, you got to have more structure. And, you know, and that's just them. That's because in school, they impose a structure. The structure is imposed and we know what it is, but there's an inherent structure to our daily lives. There's an inherent structure to all our lives. Two strangers meeting on the street, there's a structure to that meeting, a social structure. You know, what time is it? You know, the way we talk. So, you know, the inherent structure of my family's life is different than the imposed structure that happens in school at 8:30 in the morning. 8:30 in the morning when we're homeschooling, yeah, some kids may be out doing, others may still be in their pajamas. You know, so, but to say that you need more structure, and, you know, the Irish, I encourage the Irish homeschoolers, push back against this. You know, you have a structure, it's not just the school structure, you know, and motivation is the same thing. John Holt wrote about this, you know, a lot, and then Alfie Kohn took all this research and put it into a book, a wonderful book called Punished by Rewards. Kids learn because of intrinsic motivation. They're curious about things in the world. They're curious. That's all it is. They're curious, you know. And so babies put everything in their mouth, you know, and other kids ask constant questions. Others have to touch stuff, but that's their intrinsic motivation. And then we replace that with gold stars and candy and rewards, you know, with extrinsic motivation in schools, to a point where people won't do anything unless they know that there's a reward attached to the end of it. And that's not how we learn. We don't learn to talk just because someone's going to give us a reward at the end. So, you know, there's a lot of different ways of doing this. And then finally, it's different learning schedules. You know, when you're teaching, when you're working with your child at home, particularly for boys, late reading is very common. A lot of neurodiverse parents are finding homeschooling works, unschooling in particular, because they can focus on the interest and pace that their children are at. They don't have to rush through things to get to the bus, to get to the school, to, you know, get to the class. It's a different thing. And that book, Educating Children at Home by Dr. Alan Thomas, has excellent work about late reading and how the kids catch up. Just because a boy is not reading at the same grade level as other 8-year-olds, by the time they're 12, they are. You know, they catch up over time. But you know, we have this idea of run, school, run, right? And then, you know, we're talking about the crisis of loneliness. We're talking about the crisis of social alienation in America. But this is back in 2004, we were talking about it. You know, the young were breaking down in numbers then. You know, girls were cited in, what was that book called? Reviving Ophelia by Mary Pfeiffer. Girls were, and then Richard Reeves has written a book called Of Boys and Men, about how boys are disturbed by schools. It's like, when are we going to realize that we've got to do something and stop citing research that shows that all this stuff? Back in 1987, the president of the American Education Research Association said, growing evidence points to the possibility that very little can be transported directly from school to out of school use. Yet we keep saying school is the most important thing. You know, if you work in a business, this is the sort of course you'd be sent to, you know, in order to get better at your job. You know, and they're telling you excellence is a product of hard work and liking what you do. Adjust your goals to target your strengths. That doesn't happen in school. They adjust your goals to target their needs, which is to get you to pass a certain course. So completely different. only in school do dotted lines separate English from history and so on. In our lives, we see that this happens. Knowledge is connected in the world, but divided in school. Here's one of my favorite homeschooling stories. In 2002, I cut this out of the Boston Globe. This young man and his dad traveled around the world. The dad was a juggler. And so they would go to different, just traveling roadshow, and he loved origami. But they also loved math, and through origami and juggling, they learned how to, get into advanced math. And Eric Maine became famous. He was only 20, I think, but he figured out how they could fold the solar panels that they need to power really big satellites and stuff. How do they can fold them really, really small and then open them up in space? Would this have happened had he gone to school? I doubt it. There are many different ways that we can be useful in this world, and then finally, so homeschooling has grown so much, that right now there are more homeschool students, right now, it's between 5 and 6%. They're almost the same amount that is currently attending public charter schools, and 9% are attending private schools. When I got started in homeschooling in 1981, John Holt estimated only 25,000 children were probably being taught at home back then. And it's exploded. Yeah, the pandemic had something to do with it, but it's still growing and the pandemic's gone, And while I know we talk about it a lot because, in the United States, we've had court cases and stuff that have made it legal. I know that like in France and Germany, it's no longer legal. It was at one point. And so it's a tough call, but I do want to point out like other countries that have used alternative schooling and as a justification for homeschooling. In Denmark, the movie We Have to Call It School, which is for free on YouTube. These other books from the UK, Japan, Toto Chan is a lovely book about independent learning. Summerhill, of course, is famous. Education Without Schools is a whole bunch of essays from the early 70s talking about the deschooling movement. You'll find a bunch of information there. There's someone here from Italy. Check this book out. When I spoke in Italy many years ago, I learned about this book, Letter to a Teacher by the Schoolboys of Barbiana. And these were a bunch of boys who, after World War II, were destitute, living in the mountains in northern Italy. And they found, and they wanted to learn. They wanted to learn to read, I think it was. And so a priest agreed to meet them in a graveyard, which is like the only central location. And like some of these kids had to walk miles to get there every day. And that's how they learned. So, the idea that we need all these big schools, all the special equipment, all the special training, there are many ways to skin this cat. We don't have to keep thinking that, you got to go to school for 12 years and follow the curriculum in order to learn and become a productive member of society. All right, so that's it. I think I went a little long, Ken. I'm sorry.
Well, thank you, Pat. I'm sure many of the people here are familiar with John Holt's book and role in the movement. Total inspiration to me, and you're carrying on the legacy of total inspiration as well. So thank you. I want to thank the Learning Planet Festival folks for making this happen. Richard has been a key link here. I want to welcome some of my other loyalists here from Arrow that I recognize on the screen, and a shout out to Iris Chen, who's done author who's presented for Liberated Learners Network a couple years ago. So welcome to you all, and I'm really excited to have a chance to at least contact some of you from all these other countries. This is a fabulous event, and so it's really exciting to see all of you. Anybody who wants to put on their video, it's always slightly more enlivening for me as a speaker to see your reaction. So thank you for those of you who are already doing so. Anybody who wants to put on their video, thanks. So my name is Ken Danford. I'm the co-founder of North Star Self-Directed Learning for Teens in Western Massachusetts. Started in '96. I was a public school student and teacher and loyalist and reformer. I had gone to Ted Sizer's Coalition of Essential Schools graduate program. I was going to become a superintendent and fix schools. And I just hit the wall in my late 20s that this whole enterprise was beneath my dignity. I was hollering at kids to do work they didn't want to do, threatening that somehow if they got a bad grade in 8th grade history, their lives would be curtailed or ruined for not doing my class as well as they might have. I wasn't, I had to be strict according to my school system about whether I could let them go to the bathroom or not, which is something I felt was really demeaning to all of us. I was supposed to make them take off their hats, and the whole authoritarian nature of teaching was terrible and unnecessary. And for what? I mean, the kids were basically at the end of the semester, even for my quality social studies teaching that I was doing, I was creating active, informed citizens, of course, and I was proud of the teaching I was doing. Um, um, excuse me. The most of the work was just going in the trash at the end of the year. People would just say, "Can we throw this away yet?" Right? And there had to be another way, and I didn't know what it was, but I was ready to move on to, I don't know, probably not a private school, not a charter school, nothing that was going to involve you must do 12 years of this so that you can go to college. And that's when I learned about homeschooling and unschooling, John Holt, and the first key book was Grace Llewellyn's Teenage Liberation Handbook. Some of you may be familiar with Grace Llewellyn. If you're not, that book changed my life, and she's my friend, and I have a blurb on the back of her book now about how it changed my life. And it is shocking to know that there was an alternative this vast. And if you don't know this right now, maybe you're already all familiar with this, but this just was too much for me when I was, 29 years old reading this book for the first time. I knew nothing about homeschooling. I didn't really want to know about homeschooling. All I knew was I didn't like my job and the way it was forcing me to behave. And I was, there must be something else. And Grace has this book about Teenage Liberation Handbook about teenagers who grew up having never gone to school. And it turns out everybody loves them. You can not go to school and get away with it. I didn't know there was such a thing. How could that be true? How could I not know about it? This is no way this is possible, right? It was so unconventional. And so I started reading more about homeschooling and unschooling being a wing. All unschoolers are legally technically homeschooling. I happen to use the words interchangeably, though I know in the lexicon people do not use them interchangeably, but I do, so there. And self-directed learning. The idea of you can just say no thank you to school. The whole, not just public school to go to a charter school, not just public school to a private school or a parochial school. You could just say no thank you to schooling. Holy what? Why isn't everybody doing that then? This is crazy. I mean, a lot of kids are being tormented and hurt in school. Someone should tell these people they don't have to be here. And, just telling them it turns out isn't really enough, because how many 14-year-olds are going to say, well, that's grand, but I don't want to be home alone with my folks? That would be even worse. And how many parents are going to want to, pull their miserable 13-year-old from school? It's not a very appealing scenario. I mean, there's some small percentage of lifelong independent homeschoolers who are awesome human beings, but even most of them do it K-8 and go to high school for college prep and proms and sex and romance. So kids want to go to high school, and homeschooling stops mostly as a appealing independent enterprise around 6th, 7th, 8th grade. So what would it take to support all the kids I was tormenting in school at the Amherst Junior High to quit school and use a homeschooling unschooling approach? Well, it seems kind of obvious. I mean, I don't think we're that smart. I mean, we are smart, but we're not that smart. You guys can think of this, and it's happening in droves now, 20, 30 years later. But it takes an in-person community center. We're going to coach families on the legality of homeschooling, unschooling. We're going to explain to them it's not what they think it is. It's not being at home, being taught by your parents. Maybe it is in one little thing, but by the time you're teenagers, people are out and about and doing all kinds of groups and classes and tutors and having internships and making their art and their music and their sports and their activity. People are busy, and it's not a home-centered life necessarily. It's a control-centered life where the control is in the hands of the young people themselves and their parents. But there's no real, obligation. There's nobody really inspecting the homeschooling world. And so here's your free ticket. Claim your freedom. Go live your best life now. You don't need to win the lottery for a charter school. You don't need to get admissions to a private school. Every single person could file a homeschooling plan tonight and not go to school tomorrow, right? That is incredible. And so we decided that, for the people who aren't going to do that alone, my friend and I quit our jobs and rented a little office and created what was then called Pathfinder and since become North Star. And we are going to explain and support and coach and host all these kids who don't want to go to school and have a better life to lead and can't spend another day wasting one more day of their life. We're going to have them live in freedom now. And this is now year 29. We have second generation members by the dozens, right? We have former, and it's hilarious. It's comical almost. I like to laugh at myself. I'm old now. So the idea is at North Star, there's 65 kids, 8 or 9 staff. Any given day, there's about 40 kids and 6 staff there. We're open 4 days a week, at least 1 day a week. I tell the kids they can't come. We're closed on Wednesdays because they can't be so needy and pathetic that if I'm going to coach them not to go to school, they can't need North Star 5 days a week. So at least 1 day a week, they should figure out something else. And we coach them on this. Everybody, so we have a whole calendar of groups and classes. There's book groups and science things and trips and hikes and music and art and Spanish and history. There's all kinds of things happening, and they're all voluntary. They're all not for credit. There's no diplomas. There's no grades. It's just a place to go. It's like a health club. At the health club, they're not really monitoring you unless you ask them to, right? Or the library, they're not really paying attention to what you take out, and they're not really scolding you for not doing the right books. Just treat people with respect. Offer them what you have to offer. Let them choose it as they wish. People can ask for one-on-one tutorials, and keep the center open for socializing so kids can be there hanging out and spend their day there as they wish, including by what some people would call doing nothing, which we call playing. And obviously, if you're familiar with Sudbury, you could walk into North Star and think it's Sudbury-esque a little bit, except that we have a lot more on offer because we think that's a healthy way to do things. And we're not a school. Sudbury's require 5 days a week of 5 hours a day, 5 days a week to be a private school. We require 0. And so everybody's ever wanted to go to college from North Star does. Most people, so many of the kids who come arriving beaten down, thinking they're never going to go to college, end up doing it. We should get Nobel Peace Prizes for this. Far from turning kids off, we're salvaging people whose lives have gone into a rut, and said, well, here's one thing you could do to get out of your rut: stop going to school. Let's legally get you out of there so that you don't have to pretend you don't have to fight about not going anymore. Just don't go. Be done with it. 15, 16 years old. Let's get on with it. And turns out that's a super healthy, wonderful thing to say and do. And we have kids coming for all kinds of reasons. Some of them are super academic. They're novelists and artists and writers and athletes, and they don't have another day to waste because school's doing it wrong. Some of them are neurodivergent. A lot of them are LGBTQ who don't fit into school and are getting bullied or whatnot. Many have never had friends before, and they can come to North Star and hang out and just sit in the common room or sit in the library and talk to people, come and go at their own pace, arrive at any time, leave at any time, go for a walk. And it turns out that not being in charge of them, them not having anybody in charge of them is a super maturing and helpful way to be. So someone's gonna mute out there. Pat, your co-host, figure out who's got to mute them. Get them. All right. So the premise of North Star, my first goal so I have a book, by the way, Learning is Natural, School is Optional: North Star Approach to Offering Teens a Head Start on Life. There's a TED Talk I did of the same name. So that's our slogan: Learning is Natural, School is Optional. Came up with that a while back. It's really optional. There's nothing that kids who unschool or self-direct or don't complete high school can't do. There's 0 doors that are opened by high school diploma in the United States that aren't open to people without going to high school. Literally 0. Now that may not be true in your countries, and if it's not true, I'm kind of irrelevant because I'm not here for helping kids have fewer choices in life. So there has to be a back door or an alternative way to enter into universities, professional opportunities, and other things that one matures into later in life. We don't want to, cut off options later on. But in the United States, you can unschool, homeschool, for most anything that's a formal or official, the kids I work with mostly pick up a GED along the way at 16 or 17, which is 100% useful. Some people make their own diplomas. A very tiny set of North Star people will do accredited online programs, for high school, but almost nobody in our neck of the woods does that, but it's popular enough in other places. A few of our cranks do make their own diplomas. It kind of cracks me up. They just, they're pretty convinced unschoolers, pretty confident in themselves. But 90% of the people I'm coaching to leave school have other children who are staying in school. These parents don't see themselves as those kinds of people. They're not making diplomas for their kids. So the kids get a GED and it's 100% useful and fine. Turns out, you do your best life from 13 to 18. You go to community college for 4 to 6 or 8 classes, and you end up a year or two ahead of yourself from where you would have been had you just gone to high school and graduated at 18. Plus, you've had all this freedom and fun along the way to figure out the best way to spend your life or to dabble and explore things. And of course, we're not trying to get everybody to go to college. We have lots of people who start their own businesses, who travel, who get jobs, who do other things. So it's not all about college. It's just that's certainly available and on the table for everybody, specifically in the United States. I know it's true in England. You have to have a legal homeschooling option for this to pan out very well. And so the upshot is that in this conference, and I don't know everybody else at Learning Planet Festival, this is my first time here, and I'm trying to go to a couple other events along the way. But I'm pretty engaged with the education reform movement in the United States and so on. The idea is not to offer teens or young people the most freedom possible within the constraints of the schooling model. I'm sorry, but I'm going to be, hope I don't insult any of you, but that just drives me batty, right? Because there is a mechanism to help people claim 100% of their freedom and then invite them to share any amount of that with us that they choose to. You coach a teen and their parents to file a homeschooling plan, claim their freedom, invite them to come hang out at our center, and now they're in power to tell us, I'm going to come Mondays and Thursdays, I'm going to come to these classes, I'm going to come and I want this tutoring, please. And they can come and invent their weekly routine as they see fit with other activities in the community, stay as many years as they wish. They're not dependent on we don't have a diploma to give them because they don't need a diploma, and I'm not going to invent one to pretend that they need it. So we don't have diplomas hanging over them. Go get your GED, go make your own diploma. Whenever you feel ready to move on, you go do you. And if you want to, if you're going to do university track, you're going to have to start with community college because you can't just be a self-appointed genius. You're going to have to prove something to somebody along the way. But at 16, 17 years old, do some community college, have some jobs, travel, sail around the world. And so it is possible, it is simple to help people claim this freedom. And there's absolutely no reason for me to be in between themselves and their choices. There's every reason for me to be behind them, supporting them, coaching them, convincing them, that this is right and going to work out well. And I've seen other people and blah, blah, blah. But they don't need me to inspire them. They don't need me to coach them. They don't need coaching, yes, but inspiring them, I don't believe in that kind of thing. So the idea is create the environment, invite people in, and let it happen. I want to say a couple of things more on this. One is North Star's goal is to make homeschooling, unschooling, self-directed learning possible for any interested teen in our community. It is not to produce activists. It is not to produce entrepreneurs. It is not to produce artists. It's not to produce any kind of outcome of kid, or it's not to make sure all the kids read books and write papers and do math. It's not to make sure that every kid is so-called college ready, because that's going to be their own business, and we will support them if they're inclined. We don't have any investment in specific outcomes for each kid, other than they're in control of themselves. They're alert and aware and owning their choices, and in communication with their parents. We do frequent meetings with parents, and everybody has a weekly advisory at North Star. Did I say that before? Everybody has a weekly advisory, kid and adult, not parents, but we do parents 3 times a year. So we want kids to take themselves seriously, but that's our mission, is to help them live better lives without school immediately, not to make sure they get anything. In fact, one of our principles is we make possible, we don't make sure. We specifically challenge that notion. All right. I'm going to move along here. I was just something else I was going to tell you that was really important, but I forgot. We created a network for consulting others to start centers like North Star, called Liberated Learners. And there's a Liberated Learner Center in the Philippines. There's a Liberated Learner Center in Toronto. There's about a dozen of them now. And we offer monthly free webinars if you're so inclined, or anybody who wants to start a center. And we offer consulting, and we have a whole starter program to help people make blueprints. So Liberated Learners is the network to share this model around the world, which is North Star is one member of Liberated Learners. And while I'm at it, I have my own separate website because of the book with my blog. That's kennethdanford.com. But there's a lot of podcasts and videos and stuff about, in depth. But the I know what I was going to tell you. The key mission was to create the environment for my colleague Joshua Hornick, who's the co-founder, for Josh and me to be in alignment with our values, to create the network to create the environment for ourselves to work with young people as we wished. Right. And I'm glad it's helping them. I'm glad it's good for them too. But 29 years in, I'm still pretty gung-ho about it. I'm happy to go to work every day. And, I clearly made a good choice for myself. So the idea was we started North Star for ourselves. Sure, we're doing a good deed, but we're doing a good deed by identifying and creating our ideal working circumstances and getting rid of all of the stuff that we deem not necessary, including being in authority and control and judgment over children who don't need us for any of those things, right? Clean the slate, and this is really healthy. And it's not that radical. Outside of school, over the summer, this is how camps operate. They don't give grades at camp. They don't give credits at camp. You can't fail camp. After school, piano lessons and theater shows and sports. I mean, there's some competition in certain things, but mostly people choose them and they're not graded and they're not credited. And people do them because they're inspired and because they're enriching, and they do them for as long as they want. Some people do the same activity for years, and some people dabble and change, and in the same family, different kids do different things. We're very familiar with everything that I'm saying. We're just not familiar with it in a school context. We're certainly very familiar with it for adults. When you think about senior centers and libraries, we don't make sure all the seniors who go to the senior center play bingo. We just go make a friend, go get out of the house, right? And so the idea is less radical than it may seem. I just want to say a couple more words. We are similar in some respects to Sudbury's, though we're not schools and they are, which is a key difference. We're overlapping with the Agile Learning Center people, if you're familiar with them. We've got a lot of friends at Arrow and the Alliance for Self-Directed Education. There's a growing movement in the United States. Well, I don't want to get into that right now, but there's a lot of democratic schools. We're not 100% democratic at all by any means. Jerry Mintz at Arrow says we're democratic, but I don't really think we qualify. But that's okay. We make up for in freedom what we don't have in one-on-one, 100%, democracy on every decision. And we're pretty happy with how we do things. We're also very engaged with restorative practices for conflict resolution. It's a very sweet and kind place. We pay a lot of attention to how kids are talking to each other. We do intervene a lot to keep the tone in the common room. And when we see social tension brewing, we're pretty on it. Take that part very seriously, even though it may seem like it's utter chaos. It's far from that. The other thing is that we have chosen to have a modest fee. Our sliding fee scale is from $9,500 a year to $3,600 a year. We've turned nobody away from money. In 29 years, we welcomed every teen who wanted to come, regardless of their family's ability to pay. We've turned nobody away for being a hard case or neurodivergent or anything else. We welcomed every kid who's wanted to come to North Star and needed an alternative to school for the duration, and that's part of the commitment. And that's part of what I'm aiming for in the reform movement is creating options that are available to everybody, not just those that can afford it. It takes a lot of work. It's very hard. You guys, I'm sure, know that alternative schools that depend on no public money either have to have tuition or fundraising or some combination thereof. And even then, if they're going to pay real salaries, it's a real challenge. And many of them close after 3 to 5 years because it's just really, really difficult. Most of our liberated learners consulting is about the business side of things to 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 push people to take the business side seriously, because getting enough people to pay enough money plus fundraising is not nearly as easy as what we'd like it to be for anybody. And that's not just true for liberated learners, that's true for all the alternative small private schools, it's true for homeschooling co-ops, it's true for any other relevant non-publicly funded model. But I don't think we talk enough about that. And when you combine that difficulty with a commitment to be of service to all income levels, it's a super challenge, right? I have a whole chart about that. I was going to show you the budget, but I don't want to go. I want to take questions more than I want to. I can show the budget in a minute, or if you come to my webinar, I'll share the budget. The idea is the power. People where homeschooling is legal, it is possible to help people claim their self-control immediately, and I wish more people were doing it. Okay, Deborah, I'm inspired by your comments. Here, share screen, share, boom, boom. Here you go, Deborah. You can see it now. It's more or less a $375,000 budget. Fees with 50, 60 families is about $250,000 a year from our sliding fee scale. We have contributions from board members and loyalists and major donors of about $50,000 a year total. We have a couple fundraisers, which are pretty big deals. Circus Smirkus is one of them. Alumni fund drive. So we can get another $50,000 from doing our fundraising well. That is not simple. It's taken 25 years to grow into 29 now, but it took a long time to get to those numbers. But if we can get 250 from fees and another 100 from either specific donations in large scales and fundraisers, we're going to be in good shape. The staffing is 6 people more or less. We have our building and the rent, utilities, insurance, and some stuff. You got to buy some stuff. Don't have to buy everything for everybody, but you got to have some stuff. So there you go, about $375,000. The point is, there's no soft spot. If you're going to do this for 30 kids and 3 staff, you're still going to have a $200,000 budget. It's still going to be $6,000 to $8,000 a year. There's no magic number where it's not $6,000 to $8,000 to $10,000 or $12,000 a year on average to do this, and that's more money than average Americans seem to have. A lot of people can afford $2,000 to $5,000 per kid per year, but not everybody can afford $6,000 to $10,000 per year per kid. Maybe half the people can, if that, and we're subsidizing a lot of people here. It's a real challenge. I can go more into that if you wish, but we have another. I'm trying to save the 28 minutes for questions here. The point is what John Holt wrote about, what Grace Llewellyn wrote about, what the unschoolers demonstrated in the 1980s and 90s. If you know that whole story, you win. If you don't know it, it's worth going back and finding out a little bit more for yourself. But what these people demonstrated as pioneers is magical. And it shouldn't be that complicated to help everybody try living those lifestyles. Someone should be helping more ordinary families who aren't in a position necessarily to be independent homeschoolers, unschoolers. Someone should be helping them use the approach. And so that's what we're doing. There you go. I'm going to pause there. All right. We can either raise hands or we can go to the chat. Our age range is 11 to 18. For me, it's only teens because when we started, I was a junior high teacher. That was the group I wanted to deal with, and also a little cavalierly back then in the mid 90s. I felt a lot of kids who made it through elementary school were doing okay. Elementary school still had a recess. It still could have one teacher, less emphasis on grades, a little more homey. And it was the junior high where things got to be bent out of shape. I don't think that's as true anymore. I think elementary school is worse now than it used to be. There's more emphasis on testing and taking recess away from kids and all that other crap. So people should be helping. Liberated Learners does have centers that focus on younger kids. North Star doesn't, because to do so, we would need another common room, another headquarters. You can't have all the 7-year-olds underfoot of the 14 to 17-year-olds. It's just not going to work like that. So we need more. We don't have the space for that, nor the. It's just a whole one layer more of a program. But some Liberated Learner centers are indeed K through 8, ages 6 to 18, and for everybody. It's a certainly reasonable need and goal to create a Liberated Learner Center for elementary school age children who can't homeschool independently but hate Sunday nights, hate getting up Monday and going to school where they do it all wrong, right? There's kids who feel that way about school. Someone should be helping them use homeschooling. Do we have a school voucher program where we are? No, in Massachusetts, we do not. And we'll be the last state to ever have one as the home of the creation of compulsory schooling with Horace Mann back in the 1850s. There are states that do. Some of the states will let those vouchers be spent on a homeschooling, unschooling program like ours, but only 2 or 3. A lot of them are the vouchers. The education savings accounts can only go to accredited private schools. It's very dicey. It's growing rapidly. It's a little Wild West out here right now. Most of the money in the vouchers are going to people who are creating. Families are taking the money and then going to often faith-based schools or micro schools or new programs, but a lot of them are schools and not homeschooling. And only in a handful of states can the vouchers be spent ad hoc on homeschooling expenses or tutors or classes. So I'm wondering if you have addressed helping those who come with emotional challenges. Absolutely, we do. We have a load of kids who come to North Star with social anxiety, can't go to school, with depression, having been bullied, not eating, coming out of, maybe a quarter to a third of the kids come that way, maybe more, scarred a little bit, from schooling. But by no means are we only for people with troubles and woes. But we certainly are a powerful antidote or a powerful immediate tool for people who just don't want to go to school on Monday morning. Well, maybe you're right. Maybe you don't need to go there. Maybe we can do better. And maybe it starts with not knowing exactly how it's going to go. But come to this place as much or as little as you can, and we'll take it one step at a time. And my bet is on a 3 to 4 year arc. It's not on a 3 to 4 week arc. So if I'm getting you out of school and you're beaten down and struggling, and it's hard for you to break into a new place and make this transition, the whole deschooling months, fine, don't sweat it. Everybody just relax a little bit out there, right? Because really, and this is the heart of the revolution, nobody really cares in the United States how you did in high school. It's if you're applying to the elitist colleges straight from high school, sure, it's pretty hard to get into Harvard. But who gets into Harvard? A bunch of whack job unschoolers get into Harvard too. So, and if you don't want to go to Harvard, and you just live your best life from 13 to 17, you're going to be better off. So if you got some miserable 14-year-old, 15, just this year, it's like a dime. I'm sorry to be flippant, but like the 15, 16-year-old depressed girls, super academic, melting down because school's too much pressure and stupid, and they don't see the point, and the whole thing is mean, and they don't want to go anymore, but it's 2.5 more years, and if they don't, they're not a good kid, and they're going to be in trouble. Someone just telling them that just stop it. Just stop. Just come out, breathe for a minute, and you take the next 2.5 years outside of school rather than inside of school. And guess what's going to happen? You're going to be healthy. It's going to be great. It'll be the best choice you ever made. And I don't know how long you're going to spend at North Star. I don't know how much time you're going to spend in my lovely psychology class or my activities that I'm running, or under my advisory sessions once a week. But you'll come when you come. for as long as you want. And some of you may come 3 or 4 years, but some of you may come and just use this as a bridge. But just having someone tell you that you're right, and school is not what it's cracked up to be, and you have a choice, and it's a choice that's available tonight for tomorrow. Yesterday was your last day of school, is something that no one has ever said to these kids before. I guarantee you, like 90% of the time when I say, has anybody ever told you you don't have to go to school? Like, no. Well, and then I have to convince them I'm not just some crazy nut. It's pretty fun. All right, what else have we got out here in these events I see? Anybody want to raise a hand and ask a question with your voice? Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Good information. The idea of school is optional is a message that the universities here in Ottawa, Canada, are conveying to people as well. There was a Liberated Learners Center here in Ottawa. It had to close for financial reasons.
Yes, it was great.
And,
they were awesome.
Yeah, and near the end of it, they had the registrars of the universities and colleges coming in to speak to the students. And one of them, one of the prominent universities here, the registrar brought along 2 unschooled students with her. They had never been to school, and the presentation was to the effect that all you have to do is convince the school somehow that you have what it takes to follow a university program. And so for one of them, it was a boy who wanted to get into computer engineering. When he decided that he wanted to do that, he just took 5 online courses that the university recognized, did them fairly quickly because he had all these self-directed learning skills. The other was a girl, 14 years old, who took a course at the university as a special student, took some more of them in the next couple of years, ended up being admitted to journalism with already some university credits towards her degree. And so the universities are conveying here, at least, I don't know how much elsewhere, but conveying that you don't have to go to school. You can just figure out how to convince us that you would be a worthy student, and we'll take you in.
College admissions, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And I was just going to finish that little bit, Ken, by saying that the message that we were getting from the different people speaking, the different registrars, is that they're finding that the homeschooled, unschooled students are much more the kind that they want to have than these products of the school system.
Absolutely. The whole idea is again, have some sense of yourself and why you're going and why now. For a lot of high school kids, just because they graduated from high school, and that's what you do in America when you graduate from high school. If you're middle class, you go to college. I want to say a funny story, and it turns out that given, well, first of all, I don't want to say that everybody should go to college, especially given the increasing price tag in the United States of liberal arts colleges at $70,000 a year. The assumption that everybody needs to go to college is pretty sketchy, even though, and I say that as a graduate of Amherst College, hoity-toity liberal arts college here where I live. So I've done it, we had a lot of kids go to every college in the United States now. It's just not a big deal, from Brown and Columbia and MIT to Amherst and Smith and Mount Holyoke around here, in Hampshire College. It's pretty. It turns out that it's college admissions is a pretty straightforward thing for homeschooling, unschooling kids who have something to say for themselves. It's not going to go great if you've done nothing and have no record and aren't articulate and can't tell a story. Then you really do need to go to community college and do 4 to 8 to 10 class. Do a year of community college then, and then take that transcript and work up a better story for yourself. But if you've been doing that all along with some vision for yourself, and now you're ready for full-time undergraduate study and you want to make a transition into that, it's not that hard, and we don't tell people that. Funny story, in the epilogue here, my kids wrote pieces. My kids are now 29 and 25, And my 29-year-old, neither of them went to North Star, neither of them homeschooled. My older son went straight to public school, straight to the University of Colorado, which he did not take seriously, and just had a lot of fun at. And he majored in skiing, there I could tell. But anyway, he's a good boy, and he's become a teacher, and he's now, believe it or not, rebelling against me by finishing. He did a master's at Harvard Graduate School of Education, and he's now a teaching fellow there. He's all serious about conventional education. That was pretty hilarious. My daughter was at a public school, and by the end of 10th grade, she didn't like it. In 11th grade, she did a semester program called Croca, which is one of those survival living kinds of things. Came back from that, very influential. Came back from that and did community college, dual enrollment, senior year, full time, did some other things. Ended up taking a year off in Micronesia with a cousin. She didn't do any AP classes, did fairly lousy on her SATs, but had this whole environmental mindset from some of the things she'd been doing. And she got accepted to 4 fairly competitive undergraduate schools, all of which gave her a load of money to go there. And she ended up at the University of Vermont, from which she ended up graduating in 5 semesters without trying, because they took all the credits from that senior year of dual enrollment, plus some of these other escapades she had been on counted for credit without even trying. And I don't think she's that special. I mean, she's my kid. Um, so the idea is that, we can demystify this stuff. We can all just calm down. It's not such a scarcity thing. And to do some community college and UMass, which is the most common path over here, you can get through a 4-year degree by the time you're 20 or 21 with almost no debt if you just choose to do it efficiently. You don't have to get engaged with the $75,000 a year 4-year experience. And if you can do that and get scholarship or can afford it, that's your business. But there's so many ways to go through from 16 to 25, with some gap years in there too, that opening up the whole lifestyle, opening up the whole 10 years of adult, from 13 to 23 or something, is a real gift. And if people have a little bit of vision and convey that, and then, but to make it real, I'm just going to circle back. For it to be real for the younger set, there has to be an in-person hub where they can go during the day. Just telling them you don't need to go to high school isn't sufficient. Grace Llewellyn's book is brilliant. John Holt's books are brilliant. But most people need an in-person place to go 3-4 days a week to meet some friends, have some other adults in their lives, face-to-face learning. So, there's a whole wing of homeschooling that's all, Zoom only, online, everything, worlds, whatever. That's fine, but that's not where I am. I'm where the in-person help the people figure out, here's your home away from home clubhouse. It's like, for exercise, you have a gym. Not everybody just wants to get a pair of shoes and start running alone. It's okay to have a clubhouse, and it's kind of essential for most people. So, all right, who else got a question? Richard, I'll get to you in 5 minutes. Let's see if we have another question or two. Derry, is that a hand up? Yes, it is. Derry, go for it.
Yeah, I love listening to you. I've heard you before at one of Jerry's conferences, an Aero conference in Albany, quite a long time ago.
Yes, you're an inspiration. Thank you.
But it was wonderful. And I think of people like you. I'm pretty sure now that if I was born again, I'd be a Ken Danforth Liberated Learning Center entrepreneur, starting them here, there, and everywhere. Because you're pioneers of possibility. You show what can be done. My pioneer of possibility when I came into teaching was A.S. Neal and Summerhill. It was all I'd got to go on, really. I discovered him at college, where the lecturers ran behavior management courses and quoted Pavlov and God knows who else, Skinner. And I remember saying, but I want to teach kids. I don't want to teach dogs or rats. And so I started in the state system, trying to create a sort of democratic learning community with 35 kids who just failed a very high stakes test that we had in England called the 11 plus. If you passed it, you went to a grammar academic school, but if you failed it, for God's sake, this was done to 11-year-olds, you were sent to a secondary modern. So I started my career trying to create a democratic class. I was told I had to teach history, geography, religious education, social studies to these kids. So I threw the curriculum in the bin and the kids created their own curriculum basis, basically. After a year of this, I thought I'd get fired. But in fact, I got a lot of support from parents who were very pleased to see their kids recovering their confidence. And instead of getting fired, I got put in charge of 7 classes, 220 kids, and we ran the whole thing as a sort of democratic learning community. I've written a book about those 2 years. Anyway, my point really is I went on to become a head of department and a vice principal and a principal. It was interesting to listen to you mention go and sail around the world. One of the kids from the school from my school did exactly that. Ellen MacArthur, she's the youngest kid to ever go around the world single-handed as a sailor. I can't claim any credit for that because owing to economies and cuts, the sailing club at my school was shut down just as Ellen could have benefited from it. Anyway, my point is, I sometimes think listening to people like yourself and Pat, you don't really think anything at all is possible in public schools. And that's a bit tough for somebody like me because I feel pretty good about my career too. You know, I'm still in touch with probably 100 kids from different schools that I've tried to run as democratically as possible. I think things can be done in the public school system. And we've got a lot of evidence. There was a piece in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago that Pat wrote about on one of our Facebook pages and alternative education pages, a very interesting article saying that if you give kids some autonomy, the results can be quite surprising. Well, absolutely. And Pat's angle on that was really that they're only doing it and they're only arguing for it in order to improve the standards of their conventional mainstream thinking. But on the other hand, there are people like me, Pat, who use that kind of article as ammunition for bringing about change in the state school system. And I'm arguing that 20% of curriculum time should be absolutely given over to the interests, concerns, and questions of the kids. And this idea is beginning to catch on. It's caught on a bit at this Learning Planet Festival. I'm getting a lot of emails and requests for more information. Can I ask you guys, do you think it's an absolute waste of time trying to bring about any meaningful change in the public school system in the UK or in the States?
Pat, you want to go first, and then I'll go.
Yeah,
And then
I would say I am bringing across meaningful change. I am showing parents and children how they learn by choosing to go to school when they want to. And the schools have got to pay attention to this. Please, people were trying to reform the schools almost from the minute they got started. And, and I just feel like, like John Holt felt, which is if enough people say, I'm not going to go, maybe then they'll get the message because the research, their colleagues, people like you who've worked in the system and somehow didn't get chewed up and killed by it. That's good. That's good, but it's not enough. And I think that it's really going to just take people walking away and building something better. What Buckminster Phillips said, you don't complain about it. You do something, you show something different. And that's the lesson I'm taking from this.
Yeah. Thanks, Pat.
I have some sympathy for you, but only in a esoteric kind of way. I didn't see a path to being able to claim my dignity and work with kids the way I wanted to inside a public school system without getting fired pretty soon. But look, my kids went to public school. Everybody in my family went to public school. All my nieces and nephews, everybody in my whole clan and extended family, is a public school family. I was going to be a public school reformer. Today, there's a North Star kid who switched back to public school. Today is the first day of second semester. He's in school today. A lot of North Star families have siblings, have other kids in school still, public, private, charter. A lot of North Star alums have gone on to become teachers. And a lot of our parents work in schools. And there's a reason that the title of school is optional. It's not that school's bad. The school's optional. I'm more dismissive, like schools are relevant. If you find a school you want to go to, good for you. You don't find a school you want to go to, then don't go. It's kind of like summer camp. Nobody cares. Go to camp, don't go to camp. Who cares? Maybe your mother does, but no one else does. And so it's not any more important than that. And so it's optional. Optional is about as dismissive and rude as I want to get. I don't need to call it bad. I just call it irrelevant. And I think that's a healthier angle. Now, and I think it's very good that you and others have the stamina and the vision and the commitment to try to make things better. And that's where most people are. 99 whatever. Most people are in schools, whether they're public schools, so there's 80% in America, public and charter schools, 10 and 11% in private schools. The remainder is some homeschooling and other weirdo things, but mostly people are in public school and private schools. And so for some of you and others to care enough to try to improve things seems really good to me. I just can't do it. I had to leave, but I'm glad you're doing it.
Yeah, we got a Facebook group that's called There's Life After Teaching, How to Quit. It's got 172,000 followers who are teachers in the state school system. We've only got 250,000 teachers, so that means more than half of them have joined Facebook sites to try and find a way out. It's a pretty desperate situation, Ken, we're in right now.
All right.
And it's lovely to listen to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And if you just Google my name, you'll get to North Star soon enough. You can email, it'll come to me. I'm happy to talk more.
Ken, if there's time, I've got 60 seconds worth of.
Yeah. Oh, wait, who said that? Peter?
Yes.
Yeah, so everybody knows Peter Bergson is a pioneer in the field as well, back in the 1980s and 90s with his wife, Susan. Created one of the first places for homeschooling gatherings and still going. Well, anyway, Peter, What do you want to tell him?
Thank you. Just a few seconds of personal background. I started my career as a consultant in creative group problem solving. And the long and the short of it is, after working with adults to help them become not only more creative individually, but as groups, and to work more collaboratively. And these were people who were all, well established in the corporate world. These are Fortune 500 type companies that sent their people to our firm for training. It became apparent that what we were doing was remedial. We were helping adults retrieve thinking and behavioral patterns that are natural to young people and which get, I'll say, schooled out of them, but actually the whole Western culture is sort of stacked against creativity and collaboration. And so it occurred to me and my wife-to-be at the time, wouldn't it be great if there were an education system for young folks that not only didn't school these attributes out of young people, but in fact nurture them and reinforce them, et cetera, et cetera. So it was by looking at adults, not at young people in school, but looking at the failure of adults to be able to do what they wanted to do that got me into thinking about young people. And going along with that is Russ Akoff, who's one of the fathers of systems thinking. He had a phrase that really struck home. He said, begin with the end in mind. So I think what underlies a lot of what you're saying, Ken, in terms of how you view schooling, is you're saying to these young people, what kind of life do you want to have as an adult? And then from that, what is the best preparation for that?
Actually, it's even better than that, Peter. I'm going to interrupt you 1 second. I'm going to close, but it's even what kind of life do you want to live right now, not as an adult?
Well, exactly. And that's the other thing. Louise Bates Ames, who was one of the first early childhood educators and whatever from the Gazelle Institute, she was saw her talking on tape to a group of parents of 4-year-olds, and who were worried about how their children were going to do in kindergarten. And she said, the purpose of being 4 is not to prepare to be 5. And I would say the same thing, which is what you just said, Ken, which is the 6 years from grade 6 to 12 is, I don't know, 8% of your life. And aren't those 6 years just as important as the years from 40 to 46 or 62 to 68? So absolutely, you should live them in a enjoyable, positive, productive fashion, in addition to living them in a way that will increase the probability that the rest of your life will go that way.
Right. Thank you, Sylvie, for the comment there. Spot on. Okay, I think we should close up. It's 4:35. We were supposed to be done 5 minutes ago, for those of you who have a life to get on with. Pat, any last words from you?
No, it's been a pleasure.
Right, well, hopefully I'll see some of you at some of these other events that Richard's pointed out. There's one more about youth voting next week I'm going to try to get to as well. That looks pretty cool. So thank you all for being here. And please follow up if you'd like to talk more.